Okay. So when I was recording my Death Stranding footage, I the volume of my voice is way low. You can't even hear me talking at all, right? Like it's ridiculous how much I'm drowned out by the background noise of the game. And that's because on the PS5 you can't like adjust the balance. It balances it perfectly between your voice and the gameplay, but I want it lower. So I'd end up turning down the master volume of the game, right? But then I was playing Death Stranding a little bit without recording, so I turned the master volume back up and forgot to turn it back down when I was recording. So yeah. So basically I had all this footage and nothing to do with it because I was like, well, you can't hear me talking, and I'm like, I mean, I could play it silently, I guess, where you can barely hear my comments. You can like hear somebody like whispering under the gameplay footage or under the gameplay sounds. So anyway, so you told me that you wanted me to read from No Longer Human, so I thought, well, this is perfect. I'll just silence all this footage and I'll read over it. But first, I wanted to read from some poems from Nakahara Chuya. He's this Japanese poet. He was born in like fuck, I had just looked this up beforehand because I wanted to know. I think he was born in 1907 and he died in 1937. Um he's like a really famous Japanese poet, and I think Wikipedia said he was, hold up. What did Wikipedia say? You know what? He was like a leading renovator because he used like a European experimental style of writing. Something like that. Anyway, um I really like his poetry. The thing about reading his poetry in English is that English and Japanese are so different that they have to modify it like a lot to get like the intent across and to basically, and it like just destroys like the foundation of the poetry, the spoken verse that you get out of Japanese poetry because they have to translate it to English. It just we wouldn't be able to understand it if they translated it directly. It just wouldn't make sense to us, I guess. So I actually found this dude from an anime. Well, it was two animes actually. Bungo and Alchemist Gears of Judgment, which is a great anime. I would recommend it to anybody. And Bungo Stray Dogs, which is an okay anime. I'd recommend it if you like battle shonen, I guess. And I mean, it's a little bit deeper than most battle shonen, but I liked Bungo and Alchemist much much more. Probably because I'm a writer, and it focuses way more on the writer aspect of it. Like Bungo and Stray Dogs, they're just named after writers, and they have like sort of have the writer's attitude, but they're like names of the writer's books or their abilities and stuff. In Bungo and Alchemist, Gears of Judgment, it's about the writers, and these are real Japanese writers from history. Dazai's in them. Everybody knows who Dazai is, though. But yeah, that's how I found Chuya Nakahara was through anime. Okay, so this poem is called Spring Day's Evening. A zinc roof is eating a rice cracker. The spring's day's evening is mild. Thrown under arm, ash blanches. The spring day's evening is calm. Ah, is there no scarecrow? There's none. Do the horses neigh? They don't even neigh. Only, just as moonlight diffuses, is the spring day's evening docile? Calm in the field, the temple is crimson, the wagon wheel has lost its oil. When I say something in the historical present, scorn, scorn, from the skies and mountains. One roof tile worked loose, from now on, the spring day's evenings, without a word, will make its way into its own veins.
Weapons restrictions lifted.
This is a continuation of No Longer Human from where I left off in the last Death Stranding video. I have noticed that in photographs of me taken about that time together with my family, the others all have serious faces. Only mine is invariably contorted in a peculiar smile. This was one more variety of my childish, pathetic antics. Again, I never once answered back anything said to me by my family. The least word of reproof struck me with the force of a thunderbolt and drove me almost out of my head. Answer back. Far from it. I felt convinced that their reprimands were without doubt voices of human truth speaking to me from eternities past. I was obsessed with the idea that since I lacked the strength to act in accordance with this truth, I might already have been disqualified from living among human beings. This belief made me incapable of arguments or self-justification. Whenever anyone criticized me, I felt certain that I had been living under the most dreadful misapprehension. I always accepted the attack in silence, though inwardly so terrified as almost to be out of my mind. Is it true, or excuse me, it is true, I suppose, that nobody finds it exactly pleasant to be criticized or shouted at. But I see in the face of the human being raging at me a wild animal in its true colors, one more horrible than any lion, crocodile, or dragon. People normally seem to be hiding this true nature. But on occasion, an occasion will arise, as when an ox sedately and ensconced in a grassy meadow suddenly lashes out with its tail to kill the horsefly on its flank. When anger makes them reveal in a flash human nature in all its horror. I don't know why I had such a hard time reading that entire sentence, but okay. Seeing this happen has always induced me in a. Oh my god, I cannot read today. Seeing this happen has always induced in me a fear great enough to make my hair stand on end, and at the thought that this nature might be one of the prerequisites for survival as a human being, I have come close to despairing of myself. I have always shook with fright before human beings. Unable as I was to feel the least particle of confidence in my ability to speak and act like a human being, relatable as fuck, just want to say. I kept my solitary agonies locked in my breast. I kept my melancholy and my agitation hidden, careful lest any trace should be left exposed. I feigned an innocent optimism. I gradually perfected myself in the role of the farcical eccentric. I thought, as long as I can make them laugh, it doesn't matter how, I'll be all right. If I succeed in that, the human beings probably won't mind it too much if I remain outside their lives. The one thing I must avoid is becoming offensive in their eyes. I shall be nothing, the wind, the sky. My activities as jester, a role born of desperation, were extended even to the servants, whom I feared even more than my family because I found them incomprehensible. In the summer I made everybody laugh by sauntering through the house wearing a red woolen sweater with my cotton kimono. Even my elder brother, who was rarely given to mirth, burst out laughing and commented in intolerably affectionate tones, "That doesn't look so good on you, Yoso." But for all my follies I was not so insensitive to heat and cold as to walk around in a woolen sweater at the height of the summer. I had pulled my little sister's leggings over my arms, letting just enough stick out at the opening of the sleeves to give the impression that I was wearing a sweater. My father frequently had business in Tokyo and maintained a townhouse for that reason. He spent 2 or 3 weeks of the month at a time in the city, always returning laden with really staggering quantity of presents, not only for members of our immediate family, but even for our relatives. It was a kind of hobby on his part. Once, the night before he was on leave for Tokyo, he summoned all the children to the parlor and smilingly asked us what present we would like this time, carefully noting each child's reply in a little book. It was most unusual of father to behave so affectionately with the children. "How about you, Yozo?" he asked, but I could only stammer uncertainly. Whenever I was asked what I wanted, my first impulse was to answer nothing. The thought went through my mind that it didn't make any difference, that nothing was going to make me happy. Also relatable, right? Like, it's just, this book was, the first time I read this book, it was hard to read because of so much of this stuff being relatable and knowing that this is basically this guy's suicide note. He killed himself right after the final of this was published, I believe. Is very depressing. At the same time, I was congenially unable to refuse anything offered to me by another person, no matter how little it might suit my tastes. When I hated something, I could not pronounce the words, "I don't like it." When I liked something, I tasted it hesitantly, furtively, as though it were extremely bitter. In either case, I was torn by unspeakable fear. In other words, I hadn't the strength even to choose between two alternatives. In this fact, I believe, lay one of the characteristics which in later years was to develop into a major cause of my life of shame. I remained silent, fidgeting. My father lost a little of his good humor. "Will it be a book for you? Or how about a mask for the New Year lion dance? They sell them now in the children's sizes. Wouldn't you like one?" The fatal words, "wouldn't you like one?" made it quite impossible for me to answer. I couldn't even think of, of any suitably clownish response. The gesture had completely failed. "A book would be best, I suppose," my brother said seriously. "Oh?" The pleasure drained from my father's face. He snapped his notebook shut without writing anything. What a failure. Now I had angered my father, and I could be sure that his revenge would be something fearful. That night, as I lay shivering in bed, I tried to think if there was still not some way of redressing the situation. I crept out of bed, tiptoed down to the parlor, and opened the drawer of the desk where my father had most likely put his notebook. I found the book and took it out. I rifled through the pages until I came to the place where he had jotted down a request for presents. I licked the notebook pencil and wrote in big letters, "Lion Mask." This accomplished, I returned to my bed. What? So odd. I had not the faintest wish for a lion mask. In fact, I would actually have preferred a book. But it was obvious that father wanted to buy me a mask, and my frantic desire to cater to his wishes and restore his good humor had emboldened me to sneak into the parlor in the dead of the night. Now that's the stuff that's not so relatable to me. I wasn't a people pleaser as a child, and I'm not a people pleaser now. I never really have been. This desperate expedient was rewarded by the great success I had hoped for. When, some days later, my father returned from Tokyo, I overheard him say to mother in his loud voice — I was in the children's room at the time — "What do you think I found when I opened my notebook in the toy shop? See, somebody has written here, Lion Mask. It's not my handwriting. For a minute I couldn't figure it out. Then it came to me. This was some of Yojo's mischief. I asked him what he wanted from Tokyo, but he just stood there grinning without saying a word. Later he must have got to wanting the Lion Mask so badly he couldn't stand it. He's certainly a funny kid. Pretends not to know what he wants and then goes and writes it. If he wanted the mask so much, all he had to do was tell me. I burst out laughing in front of everybody in the toy shop. Asked him to come here at once. On occasion I assembled all our men and women servants in the foreign style room. I got one of the manservants to bang at random on the keys of the piano. Our house was well equipped with most amenities, even though we were in the country, and I made everyone roar with laughter by cavorting in a wild Indian dance to his hit and miss tune. My brother took a flashbulb photograph of me performing my dance. When the picture was developed, you could see my pee-pee through the opening between the two handkerchiefs which served for a loincloth, and this too occasioned much merriment. It was perhaps to be accounted a triumph which surpassed my own expectations. I used to subscribe regularly to a dozen or more children's magazines, and for my private reading ordered books of all sorts from Tokyo. I became an adept in the exploits of Dr. Nonsentius and Dr. Know-it-all, and was intimately acquainted with all manner of spooky stories, tales of adventure, collections of jokes, songs, and the like. I was never short of material for absurd stories I solemnly related to make the members of my family laugh. But what of my schooling? I was well on the way to winning respect, but the idea of being respected used to intimidate me excessively. My definition of a respected man was one who had succeeded almost completely in hoodwinking people, but who was finally seen through by some omnipotent, omnipotent person who ruined him and made him suffer a shame who's worse than death. Even supposing I could deceive most human beings into respecting me, one of them would know the truth, and sooner or later other human beings would learn from him. What would be the wrath and vengeance of those who realized how they had been tricked? That was a hair-raising thought. I acquired my reputation at school less because I was the son of a rich family than because, in the vulgar parlance, I had brains. Being a sickly child, I often missed school for a month or two, or even a whole school year at a stretch. Nevertheless, when I returned to school, still convalescent and in a rickshaw, and took to the examinations at the end of the year, I was always first in my class, thanks to my brains. I never studied, even when I was well. During recitation time at school, I would draw cartoons, and in recess periods I made the other children in class laugh with the explanations to my drawings. Explanations, excuse me. In the composition class, I wrote nothing but funny stories. My teacher admonished me, but that didn't make me stop, for I knew that he secretly enjoyed my stories. One day I submitted a story written in a particular doleful style, recounting how when I was taken by my mother on the train to Tokyo, I had made water in a spittoon, ew, in the corridor. But at the time I had not been ignorant that it was a spittoon. I deliberately made my blunder, pretending a child innocence. I was so sure that the teacher would laugh that I stealthily followed him to the staff room. As soon as he left the classroom, the teacher pulled out my composition from the stack written by my classmates. He began to read as he walked down the hall. Ew, that's fucking gross, man, the more I think about it. Ugh. Walked down the hall and was soon snickering. He went into the staff room a minute or so later. Was it when he finished it? He burst into loud guffaws, his face scarlet with laughter. I watched him press my paper on to the other teachers. I felt very pleased with myself. A mischievous little imp. I had succeeded in appearing mischievous. I had succeeded in escaping from being respected. My report card was all A's except for deportment, where it was never better than C or D. This, too, was a source of great amusement to my family. My true nature, however, was one diametrically opposed to the role of a mischievous imp. Already by that time I had been taught a lamentable thing by the maids and manservants. I was being corrupted. I now think that to perpetuate such a thing on a small child is the ugliest, vilest, cruelest crime a human being can commit. But I endured it. I even felt as if it enabled me to see one more particular aspect of human beings. He's talking about the servants sexually assaulting him as a child, to be clear. That's what he's talking about. I smiled in my weakness. If I had formed the habit of telling the truth, I might perhaps have been able to confide unabashedly to my father or mother about the crime, but I would not fully understand even my own parents. To appeal for help to any human being, I could expect nothing from that expedient. Supposing I complained to my father or my mother or to the police, the government, I wondered if in the end I would not be argued into silence by someone in good graces with the world, by the excuses of which the world approved. It is only too obvious that favoritism inevitably exists. It would have been useless to complain to human beings, so I said nothing of the truth. I felt I had no choice but to endure whatever came my way and go on playing the clown. Some perhaps will deride me. What do you mean by not having faith in human beings? When did you become a Christian anyway? I don't have faith in human beings either. It's relatable. I fail to see, however, that a distrust of human beings should necessarily lead directly to religion. Yeah, same. Is it not true, rather, that human beings, including those who may now be deriding me, are living in mutual distrust, giving not a thought to God or anything else? There was something that happened when I was a small boy. A celebrated figure of the political party to which my father belonged had come to deliver a speech in our town, and I had been taken by the servants to the theater to hear him. The house was packed. Everybody in town who was especially friendly to my father was present and enthusiastically applauding. When the speech was over, the audience filtered out in threes and fives into the night. As they set out for home on the snow-covered roads, they were scathingly commenting on the meeting. I could distinguish among the voices those of my father's closest friends, complaining in tones almost of anger about how inept my father's opening remarks had been, and how difficult it was to make head or tail out of the great man's address. Then these men stopped by my house, went into our parlor, and told my father with expressions of genuine delight on their faces what a great success the meeting had been. Even the servants, when asked by my mother about the meeting, answered as if it were their spontaneous thought that it had been really interesting. These were the self-same servants who had been bitterly complaining on the way home that political meetings are the most boring thing in the world. This, however, is only a minor example. I am convinced that human life is filled with many pure, happy, serene examples of insincerity, truly splendid of their kind, of people deceiving one another without, strangely enough, any wounds being inflicted, of people who seem unaware even that they are deceiving one another. But I have no special interest in instances of mutual deception. I myself spent the whole day long deceiving human beings with my clowning. I have not been able to work up much concern over the morality prescribed in textbooks of ethics under such names as righteousness. I find it difficult to understand the kind of human being who lives, or who is sure he can live, purely, happily, serenely, while engaged in a deceit. Human beings never did teach me that abstruse secret. As if I had only known that one thing, I should never have had to dread human beings so, nor should I have opposed myself to human life, nor tasted such torments of hell every night. In short, I believe that the reason why I did not tell anyone about the loathsome crime perpetrated, on me by the servants was not because of distrust for human beings, nor, of course, because of Christian leanings, but because the human beings around me had rigorously sealed me off from the world of trust or distrust. Even my parents at times displayed attitudes which were hard for me to understand. I also have the impression that many women have been able instinctively to sniff out this loneliness of mine, which I confided to no one, and this in later years was to become one of the causes of my being taken advantage of in so many ways. Women found in me a man who could keep love a secret, who could keep a love secret. The second notebook. On the shore, at a point so close to the ocean one might imagine it was there that the waves broke, stood a row of over 20 fairly tall cherry trees with coal-black trunks. Every April, when the new school year was about to begin, these trees would display their dazzling blossoms and their moist brown leaves against the blue of the sea. Soon a snowstorm of blossoms would scatter innumerable petals into the water, flecking the surface with the points of white which the waves carried back to the shore. This beach, strewn with cherry blossoms, serves as the playground of the high school I attended. Stylized cherry blossoms flowed flowered even on the bridge of the regulation school cap and on the buttons of our uniforms. A distant relative of mine had a house nearby, which was one reason why my father had especially selected for me this school of cherry blossoms by the sea. I was left in the care of my family, whose house was so close to the school that even after the morning bell had rung, I could still make it to my class in time if I ran. That was the kind of lazy student I was, but I nevertheless managed, thanks to my accustomed antics, to win popularity with my schoolmates. This was my first experience living in a strange town. I found it far more agreeable than my native place. One might attribute this, perhaps, to the fact that my clowning had by this time become so much a part of me that it was no longer such a strain to trick others. I wonder, though, if it was not due, instead, to the incontestable difference in the problem involved in performing before one's own family and strangers, or in one's own town and elsewhere. This problem exists no matter how great a genius one may be. An actor dreads most the audience in his hometown. I imagine the greatest actor in the world would be quite paralyzed in a room where all his family and relatives were gathered to watch him. But I had learned to play my part. I had moreover been quite a success. It was inconceivable that so talented an actor would fail away from home. One has to wonder how much acting it really is, or if it just becomes who you are. Like it became who he was, at least at this time period. The fear of human beings continued to writhe in my breast. I am not sure whether more or less intensely than before, excuse me, but my acting talents had unquestionably matured. I could always convulse the classroom with laughter, and even as the teacher protested what a good class it would be if only I were not in it, he would be laughing behind his hand. At At a word from me, even the military drill instructor, whose more usual idiom was a barbarous, thunderous roar, would burst into helpless laughter. Just when I had begun to relax my guard a bit, fairly confident that I had succeeded by now in concealing completely my true identity, I was stabbed in the back quite unexpectedly. The assailant, like most people who stab in the back, bordered on being a simpleton, the puniest boy in the class, whose whose scrofulous face and floppy jacket with sleeves, I really don't know that word, too long for him, was complemented by a total lack of proficiency in his studies and by clumsiness in military drill and physical training that he was perpetually designated as an onlooker. Not surprisingly, I failed to recognize the need to be on my guard against him. That day, Takaichi, that was the boy's name, as I recall, was as usual on-looking during the physical training period while the rest of us drilled on the horizontal bar. Deliberately assuming a solemn a face as I could muster, I lunged overhead at the bar, shouting with the effort. I missed the bar and sailed on as if I were making a broad jump, landing with a thud in the sand on the seat of my pants. This failure was entirely premeditated, but everybody burst out laughing, except exactly as I planned. I got to my feet with a rueful smile and was brushing the sand from my pants when Takaichi, who had crept up from somewhere behind, poked me in the back. He murmured, "You did it on purpose." I trembled all over. I might have guessed that someone would detect that I had deliberately missed the bar, but that Takaichi should have been the one came as a bolt from the blue. I felt as if I had seen the world before me burst in an instant with the raging flames of hell. It was all I could do to suppress a wild shriek of terror. Okay, number one, I keep fucking up reading because I think I'm just tired of reading out loud. Number two, this just goes to prove to you that the funniest people are always hella, hella, hella depressed. Like, you know how comedians are some of the saddest fucking people? That's like a stereotype. It's true. And, like, this is proof of it. The person who wrote this was wildly depressed and they lived a very shameful, degenerate life, right? And they killed themselves after they published the last part of this. So, yeah. So I'm going to finish up this page 44, and then we'll come back to it next time, because I think I'm just getting tired of reading out loud. Let's see. All I could do to press a wild shriek of terror. The ensuing days were imprinted with my anxiety and dread. I continued on the surface of making everybody laugh with my miserable clowning, but now and then painful sighs escaped my lips. Whatever I did, Takaichi would see through it, and I was sure he would soon start spreading the word to everyone he saw. At this thought my forehead broke out in a sweat. I stared around me vacantly with the wild eyes of a madman. If it were possible, I felt I would like to keep a 24 hours a day surveillance over Takaichi. Yeah, that's not weird at all. Never stirring from him, morning, noon, or night, to make sure that he did not divulge the secret. I brooded over what I should do. I would devote the hours spent with him to persuading him that my antics were not on purpose, but the genuine article. If things went well, I would like to become his inseparable friend. But if this proved utterly impossible, I had no choice but to pray for his death. Yeah, right. There's no in between, right? There's no just like you could just chill. Typically enough, the one thing that never occurred to me was to kill him. Good. During the course of my life, I have wished innumerable times that I might meet with a violent death, but I've never once desired to kill anybody. I thought that in killing a dreaded adversary I might actually be bringing him happiness. In order to win over Takaichi, I clothed my face in the gentle, beguiling smile of a false Christian. I strolled everywhere with him, my arm lightly around his scrawny shoulders, my head tilted affectionately towards him. I frequently would invite him in honey, cahooling tones to come and play in the house where I was lodging, but instead of an answer, he always gave me only blank stares in return. One day after school was let out, it must have been in the early summer, there was a sudden downpour. The other students were making a great fuss about getting back to their lodgings, but since I lived just around the corner, I decided to make a dash for it. Just as I was about to rush outside, I noticed Takaichi hovering up dejectedly in the entranceway. I said, "Let's go. I'll lend you my umbrella." I grabbed Takaichi's hand as he hesitated and ran out with him into the rain. When we arrived home, I asked my aunt to dry our jackets. I had succeeded in luring Takaichi to my room. The household consisted of my aunt, a woman in her 50s, and my two cousins, the older of whom was a tall, frail, bespectacled girl of about 30. She had been married at one time, but that was later separated. And the younger, a short, round-faced girl who looked fresh out of high school. The ground floor of the house was given over a shop where small quantities of stationery supplies and sporting goods were offered for sale, but the principal source of income was the rent from the 5 or 6 tenants built by my late uncle. Takaichi, standing helplessly in my room, said, "My ears hurt." They must have got wet in the rain. I examined his ears and discovered they were both running horribly. The lobes seemed filled to the bursting with pus. Wow, that sentence structure is strange. The holes seemed filled to the bursting with pus. I simulated an exaggerated concern. "This looks terrible. It must hurt." Then, in the gentle tones a woman might use, I apologized. "I'm so sorry I dragged you out in all this rain." He's just like a totally fake person, by the way. Just want to point that out. He's just being completely fake. He doesn't actually give a fuck about this dude's ear. He doesn't really want to be his friend either. I went downstairs to fetch some cotton wool and alcohol. Takaichi lay on the floor with his head on my lap, and I painstakingly swabbed his ears. Even Takaichi seemed not to be aware of the hypocrisy, the scheming behind my actions. Far from it. His comment as he lay there with his head pillowed in the lap was, "I'll bet lots of women will fall for you." It was his illiterate approximation of a compliment. This, I was to learn in later years, was a kind of demoniacal, okay, prophecy, more horrible than Takaichi could have realized. To fall for, to be fallen for. I feel in these words something unspeakably vulgar, farcical, and at the same time extraordinarily complacent. Once these expressions come in an appearance, and no matter how solemn the place, the silent cathedrals of melancholy crumble, leaving nothing but an impression of fatuousness. And it's curious, but the cathedrals of melancholy are not necessarily... It is curious, but the cathedrals of melancholy are not necessarily demolished if one can replace the vulgar, what a messy business it is to be fallen for, by the more literary, what uneasiness lies in being loved. Bitch! Thought you were gonna creep up. Good bitch. Ah! Alright. Hey, he threw a grenade at you. You're still dead though, so what now? Hey! Who the? Sam with the jumping punch. Ah! Ah! Wait, why aren't I using my weapon? What am I doing? I'm trying to engage it with fucking my fist and I have a gun. Yeah, we did good. Maybe he likes killing people. I don't know.